Cozy up there. All right, we ready technology wise?
You ready, Vicky?
Yes. Ready, I have 6:01 p.m. on July 16th, 2024. Call regular Hubbard Planning Commission meeting to order. If you would join me in salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Just a note, we have some of us, we have one online joining us on the screen, so.
Actually, I think.
And it looks like we also have Polly joining us too from digital world. All right, if everybody's had a chance to look over the meeting minutes from the June 18th meeting, I would entertain a motion to approve those. I'd second.
I'll have you motion.
Oh, go ahead, just say.
I'm in motion.
Second. My mistake. No, that's okay. Have a motion in a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. We have. It looks like I'm gonna ask for a point of reference, Holly. Do these need to be separate public hearings with a script for each one? Okay. So these need to be opened and closed a second time, so, okay. So first up is major variance VAR 2024-03, reliable auto at 2714 Pacific Highway. Good evening, my name is Glenn Holland. I'm the chair of the Hubbard Planning Commission, and I will be presiding over this hearing. This is the time and place set forth for the public hearing in a matter of VAR 2024-03, brought forward by the auto 2714 Pacific Highway 99E. The hearing is now open. It is 6:04 p.m. Oregon land use laws require several items to be read into the record at the beginning of every public meeting. City planner will review this material. Your patience is appreciated as she goes through these statements, and I will turn it over to Holly.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. I apologize. We do have 3 public hearings tonight, so we are going to hear this script 3 times. The applicable substantive criteria upon which this case will be decided are found in the Hubbard Development Code, sections 2.108, which is the IC Industrial Commercial Zone, 2.206 assigned standards, and 3.104 variances. All testimony and evidence received during this public hearing must be directed toward these approval criteria. or to such other rule, law, regulation, or policy which you believe to apply to this case. An issue which may be the basis for an appeal to the City Council or the Land Use Board of Appeals shall be raised not later than the close of the record at or following the final evidentiary hearing on this case. Such issues shall be raised with and accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford this body and the parties to this hearing an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue. This public hearing will proceed with a staff report and any other comments from governmental agencies in attendance, followed by the applicant and all those who are in support of the application. All those opposed to the application will be allowed to speak, followed by those with general comments who are neither for nor against the application. Finally, the applicant will be entitled to a rebuttal period. Please state your name, physical address, and mailing address clearly for the record before your comments. Please try to avoid repetition. If someone else has already expressed the same thoughts, it's perfectly all right to state that you agree with the statements of that previous speaker. Please be assured everyone will have an opportunity to speak. If you have documents, maps, or letters that you wish to have considered by this body, they must be formally entered into the record. Prior to the conclusion of the first hearing, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional evidence by requesting a continuation. And that is my abbreviated version.
With that out of the way, I need to ask the audience and fellow commissioners a few questions. Does any member of the audience have any objection to the notice that was provided? We'll move on. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare potential or actual conflict of interest or bias?
I built the building about a year ago. We finished. So I built the reliable auto. So I'm not part of this application at all.
Okay.
Do you think that represents any bias to you?
You know, I know them. I mean, I built a building for them, so probably.
Okay.
For me, I don't see it, but you know, I don't know.
Okay. All right. I appreciate it.
So I'll abstain.
Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to report any site visits or ex parte contacts?
I've been there once.
I drove by. I just seen it from the highway in passing.
Hard not to drive by it.
Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the impartiality or ex parte disclosures of any member of the Planning Commission? All right, with that, if we could have City Planner Holly Byron, please give the staff report.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Holly Byram with the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments. I serve as the contract city planner for the city of Hubbard. I apologize, I'm not there in person. I'm home with COVID at the moment. It's still very much alive. So I'm going to do my best with this full agenda to communicate everything the Planning Commission needs to know to make an informed decision. So for this first application is a major variance. Typically, the Planning Commission would not review a sign permit. Those are typically done in-house by staff. But the reduced setback requested on this sign does qualify as a major variance, and that is a type 2 application, which means that the neighbors get a say. So we want to make sure we hear if there are any concerns here. So Reliable Auto, we reviewed their site plan and partition a couple of years ago. They have undergone development of their site. They have developed their building and now they're ready to post their sign. The challenge with their site is that they are on a flag lot and their flag lot only has 35 feet of frontage. 25 feet of those are driveway. 5 feet of those are paved walkway and 5 feet of those are landscaping. And so they really don't have a lot of room to post a large freestanding sign that would be visible to traffic on Highway 99E. While still meeting the setbacks of the zone. And so I have included all the sign standards in here, but that's really not for discussion other than the setback issue. So the way that your sign standards read in Hubbard is you are allocated a certain amount of square footage that you can use on either a freestanding and or wall sign, and that's based upon the length of your frontage of your property. For flag lots, we typically use the property line parallel to the street. And so all that being said, they have a very large property and then they can max out the sign size. They are not maxing out their sign size because there's also a provision in the code that says if your sign is 28 feet or under, so relatively small, you can reduce your setbacks by half. And so for that reason, they were going for a 5-foot setback instead of 10-foot side setback on the north side. But they still can't meet that with the flagpole. And so what they are requesting is a 2.5-foot setback, which is half of the minimum 5-foot setback. And so that would put the sign in their landscaping strip there along the northern property boundary. The applicant states that this is really the only location that they can post it there where it would be visible to traffic on 99E. The alternative for them would be to work with one of their neighboring property owners to secure an easement to place a sign on a different property. And that was not ideal for the applicant. And so they are choosing this route. The variance criteria starts on page 7 for the Planning Commission, but I'll just summarize briefly here. Basically, your variance criteria requires that there's some kind of a unique condition on the property. And in this case, the physical characteristic of that property being a flag lot is unique along that strip of 99E. There's also criteria about if you were to strictly adhere to the standard, would you be denying this property owner, the privileges that other properties in the district enjoy? And then, but also would you be impacting other properties in the area? So when this public hearing was set, we sent public notice to the abutting property owners. We haven't received any concerns from neighbors about the proximity of the sign, but certainly we could hear from any interested parties this evening. It doesn't appear that the location of the sign would impact the safety. It is located out of the clear vision area for traffic entering 99E. And it would not impact the view of any abutting properties for their driveways either. It is spaced far enough from other freestanding signs along this strip as well. So overall, staff supports the major variance request here. There are a couple recommended conditions of approval, and those are on page 9. The first one is simply that they secure permits from Yamhill County as required, that the standard language about sign maintenance, that the property owner is responsible for maintenance of those signs. There are standards about illumination, and then also the 2-year approval timeline. So if the Planning Commission is supportive after hearing public testimony, your options for a motion are on page 10, and option A to approve is the recommended motion. So attached to the staff report, we have the application package. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Just a point of clarification, you said Yamhill County, but we're actually dealing with Marion County. I just went down.
Can I blame that on the COVID?
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, Marion County does issue building permits for the city of Hubbard.
Any questions?
Thank you, sir.
I've got a question.
Yes.
So how long ago were the neighboring properties alerted to this?
So typically the notice goes out 20 days prior to the public hearing.
And no responses from anybody?
Not that we've received.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, we'll move forward with public testimony. I will now accept public testimony regarding this case. Does the applicant wish to come forward or a representative to speak? See anybody? We'll move on. Is there anybody online? I didn't even think to. No, okay. Any proponents who would like to speak in support of the application? Hearing none, any opponents? Somebody who would like to speak in opposition to the application? Or neutral parties? Is there anyone who would like to speak neither for nor against the application? Since we didn't have any testimony provided, we will move through the applicant rebuttal. And again, any clarifying questions that the commissioners may have before we close. Before I close or continue public hearing, is there any additional questions from planning commissioners or staff? As a reminder, once the hearing is closed, only commissioners or staff may speak. So we'll go ahead and close the public hearing at 6:16. And I would entertain a motion to resolution. Or is there discussion?
I mean, I would enter a motion to approve. Based on findings.
I'll second that.
So a motion to approve as presented.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Patrick seconded online. Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Opposed.
Did you vote?
I'm not going to.
Oh, that's right. You're gonna say, thank you. Appreciate that. So that motion carries because we had a majority to do with that. So that application is approved as presented.
Good.
All right, moving on to conditional use permit for dragon types or pipe motorcycles at 38 or 3187 G Street. Good evening. My name is Glenn Holm. I'm chair of the Hubbard Planning Commission. Please bear with me. I know this is repetitive, but I will be presiding over this hearing. This is the time and place set forth for the public hearing the matter of conditional use permit CUP 2024-01 for dragon pipes motorcycles at 3187 G Street. This hearing is now open at 6:17 p.m. Oregon land use laws require several items to be read into the record at the beginning of every public hearing. The city planner will review this material. Your patience is appreciated as she goes through these statements, and I'll turn it back over to Holly.
Thank you, sir. The applicable substantive criteria upon which this case will be decided are found in the Hubbard Development Code, sections 2.106, which are the C commercial zone, 2.200 general development standards, 3.103 conditional use permits, and 2.305 vehicular sales, service, and related uses. All testimony and evidence received during this public hearing must be directed toward these approval criteria or to such other rule, law, regulation, or policy which you believe to apply to this case. An issue which may be the basis for an appeal to the City Council or the Land Use Board of Appeals shall be raised not later than the close of the record at or following the final evidentiary hearing on this case. Such issues shall be raised with and accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford this body and the parties to this hearing an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue. This public hearing will proceed with the staff report and any other comments from governmental agencies in attendance, followed by the applicant and all those who are in support of the application. All those opposed to the application will then be allowed to speak, followed by those with general comments who are neither for nor against the application. Finally, the applicant will be entitled to an rebuttal period. Please state your name, physical address, and mailing address clearly for the record before your comments. Please try to avoid repetition if someone else has already expressed the same thoughts. It's perfectly all right to state that you agree with the statements of that previous speaker. Please be assured that everyone will have an opportunity to speak. If you have documents, maps, or letters that you wish to have considered by this body, they must be formally entered into the record. Prior to the conclusion of the first hearing on a land use application, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional evidence by requesting a continuation. Okay.
With that out of the way, I need to ask the audience and fellow commissioners a few questions. Does any member of the audience have any objections to the notice that was provided in this matter? Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the planning commission to hear this matter? Does any member of the planning commission wish to declare a potential or actual conflict of interest or bias? Does any member of the planning commission wish to report any site visits or ex parte contact?
Driven by.
Every day.
Everyone's driven by this one.
Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the impartiality or ex parte disclosures of any member of the planning commission? With that out of the way, Holly, would you be able to get the staff report then?
Absolutely. Okay, so this is a public hearing for a conditional use permit. Just as a reminder, every zone in the city of Hubbard has a list of uses that are permitted outright and a list of uses that are permitted only with a conditional use permit. And the reason for that is that typically we like a little more review for those conditional uses to ensure that there would not be any adverse impacts to the neighbors. So that is why we are here this evening. This property should look familiar to the Planning Commission. We reviewed this property for a site development review and a conditional use permit just 2 years ago. And that was for a vehicle tow yard and auto repair shop. And so very similar land use being proposed. This would be for motorcycle sales and a repair shop. And so the old business has left. There's no longer a towing operation there, and a new business has proposed to take occupancy there. So in the staff report, I have included the old site plan. The new business owner is called Dragon Pipe Motorcycles, and they are not actually proposing to change anything significantly about the site. You'll remember that the previous business, the towing operation, they were required to pave their parking areas and their driveway there. And so they have done that. In the staff report, I've included the aerial photos and then also the Google image street view. So you can see that those areas have been paved. One of the most challenging things about this conditional use permit is that there are some conditions of approval from the last land use approval that we don't know if they've actually been satisfied. And so this new business owner is kind of inheriting maybe a couple more to-dos because of that. So let's walk through some of those here. On page 3 of the staff report, you have the site plan that was submitted by the prior business. You can see it's a corner property because they have frontage on 99 and G Street. However, they take access from G Street. They have a couple parking spaces out front, roll-up bay doors, and then they have a fenced yard for parking where there's also a outdoor advertising billboard. And that fenced yard is screened. There's some stormwater swales along both G Street and 99. And then there's a small amount of landscaping along the eastern side. So the Hubbard Development Code has criteria that apply to vehicular uses. And they simply require that any place where you have vehicle service station or vehicle sales, that you have all of the area paved and that it can be screened from residentially zoned properties. And so those standards apply here, and that is why the previous business had to pave the lot. The conditional use permit standards start on page 5. We've already discussed that a motorcycle repair business is listed as a conditional use. Whether the characteristics of the site are suitable We know that there was a prior vehicle repair station there before. Whether the development is timely considering the adequacy of transportation system and public facilities and services. So this is when we really get into the discussion about the previous conditions of approval and which ones were satisfied and or not. So some of the discussions we had last time were about the transportation of the 2 streets abutting this property. You'll remember that over the last few years, we have required right-of-way dedication whenever there's a new development along 99, because in some places 99 is only 80 feet wide, where the right-of-way should ultimately be 101 feet wide. And so when this development was approved a couple years ago, they were required to dedicate a 10-foot public right-of-way. And we don't know if that has been satisfied yet. It may have been, but we just need a little bit more information on that. If this had been a new development, they would have been required to do street improvements and frontage sidewalk and all of that. However, it was simply a change of occupancy at that time. And so the increase in trips wasn't proportional to justify the right-of-way dedication and the frontage improvements. And so that's why there was no sidewalk required at that time. Let's see here. The parking lot was paved, but it doesn't appear that the parking spaces were striped as they were required to be. And so that's something that the new business owner will need to provide, is just striping on those parking spaces there. And then it's also not clear whether the required bike parking was provided at that time. So the new business owner, if there's not already a bike rack out front, they would be responsible for satisfying that condition of approval. In terms of the character of the surrounding area, this is kind of a transition zone here between the 99 corridor, which is busy, auto-oriented, and then further down G Street, where we have residential uses and ultimately residential zoning. So at that time, we discussed that the tow yard was going to be screened by the slats in the chain link fence. And then the property owner, or the business owner rather, was going to put a little bit more screening along the eastern boundary of the property against that abutting house. Excuse me. It's not clear if that was satisfied, so that remains a condition of approval. So the conditions of approval start on page 8. And that's where you'll see the highway right-of-way dedication, striping the parking, and the bicycle parking. I also want to call out the driveway width, and this is an issue we should discuss. So at that time, the applicant was required to maintain the width of the existing driveway to 36 feet. It looks like it was paved to more than 36 feet. And so in this case, what this condition of approval would require would be for the new business to reduce that width either through landscaping or planting or curbs in that area, if the Planning Commission believes that this is still an applicable condition here. And so the rest of the conditions of approval are included. And the Planning Commission options are included on page 9. Excuse me. I'm going to step away for a second. Yes.
Are there any other questions from commissioners for Holly, even though she's just stepped away? We can come back to her.
Well, I'm curious why they would need to reduce the 36 feet of paving.
This would be my hunch, but we don't allow everybody else to pave their entire frontage.
Right, which we had the other property
And we've actually set the precedence where residence was required to.
with the residents,
So that would probably be my hunch, but I'm not the expert.
Is that,
So I can't speak to that a little bit. So we are trying to be more consistent with our code.
sure,
And so in this case, though, the planning commission does have the authority to say, in this case, it's existing, it wasn't in compliance before, we're not gonna require the, new business to meet that requirement.
I would agree. I mean, it's existing, it's open. Hasn't hurt anybody up to this point, the way it is. I don't know why we would touch it.
no, I agree, we didn't touch it, but I had forgotten about the, other case.
Yeah, but it's, again, Sean brought up that it's existing, it's there.
New owner,
Just not new occupant, basically. Driving in and out is gonna be a heck of a lot easier, close to 99E there. So, I've never seen a problem, and I literally drive by there every day.
All right, I will now accept, public testimony regarding this case. Would the applicant or the representative like to speak? To the case at all?
Yeah.
Go ahead and come on up to the podium, state your name and address, please. Welcome.
Thank you. Nathan Moraes, 3187 G Street, Hubbard, is the business. You're not home address there, right?
What do you want, Mickey?
Fun.
Okay.
All right, so myself and Carrie are the owners of Dragonfly Motorcycles. What I would put to you guys is the striping of the parking spots. We only have motorcycles, so I mean, I can put stripes down for cars, but we really only work on bikes, and sell bikes is pretty much all of our jam. As far as I heard a bicycle rack. I can do that. We don't work on bicycles, nor any of our customers come to us on bicycles. And then as far as like, improving the property, I'm sure you guys have all seen, we completed painted the building. It looks so much better. We're super happy with how it came out. And then Carrie, she's kind of a green thumb kind of person, so we're planning on putting, we have that small, green space that you guys had for the last business. So we'll be just adding to that. And the neighbors that are joined with us, the couple that live there, we're in communication with them and they're great folks. So they're real happy we're there. But yeah, we're just happy to be a part of Hubbard and we plan to be real involved.
Parking spaces are for your customers to drive in, not the one that you're gonna repair the bikes on.
Mhm.
So I think that'll have to be done because that was part of the approval process from last
Okay.
application,
Okay.
in my opinion. Is people coming, they need to park, I mean, they need direction where to park.
Good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyone who wants to speak in support of the application? Anybody who would like to speak in opposition to the application? Any neutral parties, or is anyone who would like to speak either for nor against the application? Hasn't generated a lot of talking, so do you have anything else further you'd like us to know from you before we move forward?
I don't think so. Yeah. Well,
All right.
I think we'll be an asset to the community for sure.
Well, thank you. Much
But
appreciated.
bikers in our town, let's try it.
We're motorcyclists, not bikers. Yeah, right.
Do any of the commissioners have any questions for the applicant? Patrick, you good? Awesome. All right, before I close or continue the public hearing, are there any questions from the planning commissioners, staff, or anyone? As a reminder, once I close the hearing, only commissioners or staff may speak.
Chair,
Yeah, go ahead, Ollie.
thank you. So if the Planning Commission desires to change any of the conditions of approval listed here, you would be using option B for a motion. And that would be to approve with the recommended findings and conditions as revised by the Planning Commission. And then you would state your revisions there.
Thank you, Holly.
Mhm.
Did you have a question, Brett?
I was gonna ask that question.
Okay.
She read me.
All right, so let's go ahead and close the public hearing at 6:35. And we will. Move to discussion between commissioners if there's revisions, if there's recommendations.
I think just have them do the parking stripes, were required and, the rest, we just leave it as it is. Because we've approved it basically from the last planning commission a couple of years ago, and nothing's changed. They're auto repair shops basically, but nothing else has changed really.
So I'm hearing you say option B, which is to approve and make a revision to not pull up the extra parking lot, but leave the striping as is.
No, if they install the striping, there is no striping from what I understand, right?
Right, yeah, they need to put on the striping,
Yeah.
which is as is, but option B is to revise part of what was approved, which was offered up, which was we would have to remove some of the pavement from the parking lot, correct? It was option A. Option B,
It's
striping the same way.
And we,
The revision I'm saying is they don't need to remove the
no,
that extra part,
and that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
It isn't be exactly that,
if that's what we want the revision to be.
yeah, all right.
Please.
So what we need, I apologize, Chair, Commissioners. So what we need is, for B, to say these are, we're approving, and it's revised based on what had been previously approved. So, okay, they need to put striping in, yes, that was required before. They don't have to remove any of the driveway area. The screening, they don't have to add additional screening. They don't have to put in a bike rack. So those, it needs to be kind of detailed out like
Yeah,
that.
so if we deviate from the conditions listed, that's where B would come in.
Right.
So, but we need to be specific as to what those deviations are.
Correct.
Right now, we're approving as is presented. If we go, if we have a motion to approve as presented, so.
Yeah, basically stripe it and the rest, I'll leave it the way it is.
But that's included, the striping is included.
Yes.
Because it was not.
It is.
And they just need, I guess we just go back, but they just need to do it.
Holly, can I ask you a clarifying question?
Yes, sir.
I was here when we approved this last time. Is landscaping up to where it needs to be for percentage wise for the property? Because I remember asking for more screening and that never happened.
Yeah, it's not clear from the site plan that was submitted and approved if they meet the full percentage that's required. It does appear from the aerial imagery that the fenced yard does not extend all the way to the property boundaries. So it could be that some of the grassy area along 99, for example, is technically part of their property.
You found it as landscape.
Yeah, so it's not clear if the 10% is met or not, but if that landscaping on the eastern side could be enhanced, it sounds like that is the intent already. So it should not be an issue there.
One more question for you, Holly.
Yes, sir.
H, the bicycle parking.
Yes.
The minimum of 2 bicycle business parking spaces, just one, which is a double-sided rack. That's
Yep.
something we would require for any business, yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And because it could be employees using it or, could be customers. You never know.
Thanks, Holly.
Yes.
Okay, so, I'm hearing kind of a consensus building to approve as presented. Does that include the driveway?
No, as revised, because as presented means they have to take up part of the driveway.
Exactly.
So
Right,
we need to
so-
clarify
Yeah.
if there's some changes that you guys want to the driveway.
No, in my opinion, it's been working, it's their, business comes into town, we're not gonna make them do something that is existing, I guess. want to work here. And only because it's existing. If they were putting something new in, that'd be a different story.
So let me take a,
Yeah,
oh,
Patrick,
I was just going to move that we approve the major or the variance with all of the conditions of approval except for condition G, the driveway width.
okay, so I have a motion. Is there a second on that motion
I would say.
as stated? So I have a motion and a second. Any more discussion on that motion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor of, approving this application, as presented with the one deviation of striking condition G, from the approval. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Welcome to Hubbard.
Well, one other thing. One other thing, what kind of beard oil do you use there?
We sell at a shop.
That wasn't in the use permit.
Recycling?
Yeah, no, I have scented and unscented. So I'll try to.
I'll stop by.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out too. Okay, next up is item 3C. Which is legislative amendment LA 2024-01, City of Hubbard action to correct 2001 map error in the comprehensive plan, use designation map on the zone map. For 6 properties located on G Street. Good evening, my name is Glenn Holm. I'm Chair of the Hubbard Planning Commission. I will be presiding over this hearing. This is the time and place set forth in the public hearing matter of legislative amendment LA 2024 amendments for the Hubbard Comprehensive Plan, map land use designation map, and the Hubbard zone map for 6 properties on G Street to correct the 2001 mapping error. This hearing is now open. It is 6:42 p.m. Oregon land use laws require several items to be read into the record at the beginning of every public hearing. The city planner will review this material. Your patience is appreciated as she goes through these statements, and I'll turn it back over to Holly.
Thank you. Let's hope I can get through this. The applicable substantive criteria upon which this case will be decided are found in the Hubbard Development Code, the City of Hubbard Comprehensive Plan, and the Oregon statewide planning goals. The specific criteria are summarized in the staff report and will be reviewed at this hearing, or the continued hearing as the case may be. All testimony and evidence received during this public hearing must be directed toward these approval criteria or to such other rule, law, regulation, or policy which you believe to apply to this case. An issue which may be the basis for an appeal to the Department of Land Conservation and Development shall be raised not later than the close of the record at or following the final evidentiary hearing on this case. Such issues shall be raised with and accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford this body and the parties to this hearing an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue. The public hearing will proceed with the staff report and comments from governmental agencies, followed by those in support of the code amendments, those opposed to the code amendments, and then general comments, neither for nor against the amendments. All speakers should try to limit their comments to 3 minutes. Please state your name, physical address, and mailing address clearly for the record before your comments. If you have documents, maps, or letters that you wish to have considered by this body, they must be formally placed into the record of this proceeding. Any party may request a continuation of this hearing. Okay.
With that out of the way, I need to ask the audience and fellow planning commissioners a few questions. I need to ask if there are any objections to the notice that was published. Are there any declarations of bias by any member of this body? Are there any declarations of conflict by any member of this body?
So I didn't see that page in my packet. I happen to live on G Street. I don't know if this mapping error affects me, but if it does, I'll just recuse myself.
Thanks, Patrick. All right, I will pass it back over to Holly for the staff report.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is a legislative amendment, which means that this is an action being proposed by the city itself. This is not an application coming from a private applicant. A little bit of background here. In 2021, COG staff was working with your city staff, both at City Hall and in Public Works, and we were reviewing your zone map and your comprehensive plan map. We had gone back as far as the year 2000 to review some of your old ordinances to ensure that our maps were correct so we could get a clean system in place. And at that time, we discovered a couple what we believe to be map errors. And so this proposed legislative amendment would just be a package of 6 properties, which we believed were incorrectly zoned and designated when the maps were converted from black and white over to color between the year 2000 and 2001. And so this was an issue that we brought to the city council, gosh, I think a couple years ago, and they directed staff to move forward with this legislative amendment. And we've been so busy in the interim that we're just now moving it forward. So although we open tonight as a public hearing, we can treat it kind of as a work session in terms of educating the Planning Commission about the issue and then hearing from any concerns. And then let's go ahead and continue this public hearing to next month because this staff memo in front of you, you only just received and there's no findings in here. So we want to make sure that the recommendation is solid before we move forward to City Council. So there are 6 properties involved here. The property owners have received a notice of this public hearing. We did publish it in the newspaper, and we also sent a courtesy notice a couple weeks before that. The exact properties are shown in a map on page 2 of this report. Pat, have you received it by email, or shall I be sharing my screen? Would that be helpful?
Oh, I'll check my email right now. Sorry, I'm in Texas for work today.
Let me see if I can share my screen. Yeah, I can. Okay. This will be helpful. Okay. Okay. And so these are the properties that we're talking about. It's 6 properties on G Street. This is helpful to understand which properties we're talking about here. So there's 6 properties. Most of them were developed with either single family or duplex houses somewhere between the 1960s and the 1990s. Only one of which is kind of underdeveloped at this time. And so back in 2001, they were mistakenly changed. So here's the old map from 2000, the black and white map. You'll see that some of those properties were high density residential and some of those properties were medium density residential in 2000. But then when the maps were converted in 2001, all of those properties ended up as commercial zoning and commercial designation. And you'll see that there are other callouts on this map from the ordinance that show if any changes were made to the maps, what they were. Same with the zoning map here. There were callouts made for any changes, but these particular properties were not called out and they were not addressed in the findings. And that's the reason we believe these were not intended to actually be converted over. So one of the first steps that staff did, we reached out to the Marion County tax assessor just to confirm whether or not there had been any impact to these properties' taxes as a result of this mapping error. And the assessor's office confirmed that there were no impacts because these properties were already developed and in use for residential purposes. So there was no impact to taxes as a result of the error, and there will be no impact to taxes as a correction to the error. The only change that they'll see with taxes will come in future development. So if any of these houses are demolished and replaced, or if that one underdeveloped property is developed in the future. So the direction that staff got from City Council was to move forward with correcting the map error, which staff interprets as returning all 6 of the properties from commercial back to residential use. And so we reached out to property owners to notify them that that was our intention. And the purpose of tonight is really to start this discussion and to hear from any of the property owners if they have questions, comments, concerns about this. Again, most of these properties have houses on them already, and they're being used for residential purposes. So this evening, staff recommends that the Planning Commission open this up for public comments. We can try to answer some questions, we can have a discussion, and then we should continue this public hearing to next month, at which time we'll have a formal recommendation and findings to support it. So that is my brief memo. I'm happy to focus in on any of these maps if you like. But otherwise, I will open it up for Planning Commission questions and or public comments.
Thanks, Holly.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions for Holly at this point?
Well,
Obviously gonna have an opportunity, but go ahead.
Have the properties to the west, 32, 36, and 32, 76, they look like they may be using those for commercial purpose? Are they all just residential?
Yeah, so let's zoom in. So the very farthest west property, 3236. So this historically had been used in conjunction with 3276, and our understanding is this building right here is kind of an accessory shed building. There is no approved land use on this property currently. I believe the city has sent the property owner a code enforcement letter in the past requesting that these vehicles be removed until a land use is actually developed here on this property. But at this time, there's no formal land use approved there. Is that helpful?
I just wonder over the 23 years since it got changed, if they've started to use anything as a commercial business. I see a lot of vehicles on there. But if they haven't used it as a commercial business, if they haven't taken advantage of the mistake of the change in what it was meant to be used as.
Right. To our knowledge, there's no business license on that property and there's no formal land use approval on that property.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Vicki.
So the property owner at 3236 contacted me and would like to be commercial, have the property zoned commercial. The property owner at 3276 G Street, they were still deciding and they were going to get back to me, and I have not heard from them, and that was yesterday.
So that's something we could include in the package for approval at the next meeting.
So Holly, why are we changing it now? I mean, it was a mistake back then, and it's someone. It's surrounded by commercial properties.
Mhm.
I know the houses,
Mhm.
and if I own a property like that here in town, and if I replace a house, I can replace a house.
Mhm.
They can't stop me from doing that. So what would be the benefit of changing it back to residential only?
Yeah. So if the property is developed and used as residential, it should be counted toward your residential land use inventory. You'll remember that the city of Hubbard is about to start their economic opportunities analysis, and that is an inventory of all your available employment land. This land technically right now is zoned for commercial development, but it's not usable for commercial development. And so it should be removed from that inventory and appropriately zoned for the land use that it is. Your non-conforming code does allow those houses to remain if it were to remain commercial zoning. However, there are limitations on what can be done with those houses in terms of expansion and use. So it makes sense to have them zoned and designated appropriately for the use that's on them.
What limitations would they have if they wanted to add a room on, do you know offhand?
Well, certainly we'd have to look at the setbacks applying to the zoning that they have today. The challenge is that when this map error was made back in 2001, it was then acknowledged by the state, which makes it official, and so we still have to go with what the map says. So until it's converted back to correct the error, we have to go with what the maps say currently.
So if the property owner to the west, the bigger lot, wants just stay in the commercial zone, could we cut it right there and do residential the rest of the way?
Yeah, so that's an important question. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. You know, the city council's intent is to correct the error, but if there are reasons to, you know, for the sake of either your residential land supply or your employment land supply, if we can make strong findings in that way, then it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And that's why you don't have a staff recommendation in front of you this evening. I spoke with DLCD about this, and so we want to make sure we understand the desires of the property owners and their intended use and their understanding of when they purchased the property.
Right, 3276 was bought recently, I know, well, within the last 10 years, so that they bought a commercial property, basically, and if we're gonna tell them that what they bought is not correct anymore, I don't know how that's gonna be fair.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. And that's part of the reason that staff sent the initial courtesy notice too, was just to make the property owners aware that we were having this discussion and so that we could get their feedback as well.
Perfect. Any other questions? I'll go ahead and accept, anyone who would like to speak in support of the amendment? Seeing no one stepping forward, is there anyone who wants to speak in as opposition? Anyone who would like to speak neither for or against? And seeing that there was no new testimony added, I'm assuming we don't have more follow-up, so more questions from staff at this point. Before we continue the public hearing, are there any additional questions from Planning Commission of staff or anyone? Staff recommendation is to continue the public hearing on this legislative amendment to the time and date certain on the next regular Planning Commission meeting, 6:30 p.m. on Tuesday, August 20th, 2024. I would entertain a motion to continue.
Motion to continue.
I second.
Motion and a second, any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor of continuance, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? We will take that up at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ollie.
Mhm.
All right, next up. 6:58. Do you want to move straight on, Vicky, or do you want to?
If you want to take a break and then the council members can come,
Okay, so let's take a 5-minute
okay.
break or a 10-minute break, whatever. And we'll get going here in a few minutes.
You guys are ready to go whenever.
Awesome. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and open up the joint city council and planning commission work session. Let's gavel that in. There we go. Yeah, I'm trying to learn to use that. With that, we have one agenda topic that we're gonna be doing here, discussion regarding the horizontal mixed-use concept. Presenter Jerry Jones, I'm assuming, there you go. Marcher Company, am I even pronouncing that Marcher? Mocker, okay. I could read it like it was, yep, yeah. Discussion regarding the potential revision of the Hubbard Development Code, allowing for residential development within the C commercial zone on the ground floor, rather than only above the primary commercial development. So with that, I would invite you to come forward. And can you hear us good enough back there? I'm trying to speak loud. I know that the mics are going to be all over the place.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor, city councilors and planning commissioners. I think we've got the who's who of Hubbard here tonight, so I appreciate that, everyone coming out here. This is important to us, and I see this is important to the city as well. So as you explained, my name is Jerry Jones. I'm the founder and principal project manager of Mocker. We're a development assistance company and a developer within the Northwest, so mainly operating here within Oregon, many different regions in Oregon. So I'm going to start by, I think this is pulled up. Thank you.
Is that, is it on?
Each one of these cities is a little bit different on this. There we go. Look at that. Okay, we're working.
Okay.
Great. So I just quickly want to introduce a couple folks that have been integral in working this with me. First of all, in the audience, Seth Anderson with Sage Architects, principal architect, planner, who's been doing this work for many years, as well as online. We have Stephen Holberg, who's a land use attorney with Rather White and Parks, who's been assisting with some of the text and some of the code that we've been going through on this. So going back, I've called this Bring Hubbard's Community Vision to Life. And I'll apologize to the planning commission because they saw a lot of this in the past. So some of it might be a little bit redundant for you all, but for the sake of getting city council up to speed with our last conversation with, I want to go over some of this before. So really you guys embarked on a community vision to say, hey, what does Hubbard want to be as it continues in the future? What does growth look like? And I think some of the strengths of that are really evident within that action plan about Hubbard being small and friendly. I mean, we're all here, we're smiling, we're talking about growth, and Hubbard has that great feel. It's got some great small business development opportunities. Small businesses want to come here in all different types of shapes and sizes. Forward-thinking leadership right here at the dais, as well as paid staff. And then some top-notch public safety that really chime through evident of the action plan. However, there are some weaknesses, right? So that limited retail and restaurant options as seen as a pass-through through Highway 99. And just kind of that image, right? That image as you're teetering on the cusp of growth and what Hubbard has been in the past and what it wants to be in the future. It's just a little bit unsightly. We'll go through that. But with weaknesses creates opportunities. So the opportunities is definitely some developable land in this downtown area and this core along 99. And the revitalization is definitely long overdue, and people are starting to look at Hubbard, such as ourselves and others, as what could happen there and how do we take that vision into action. This is just a quick example of one property that we've seen and spoke about that just gives us kind of like this unsightly view along 99, which is in a commercial zone, and it could be so much more than what it sits today. You know, large parking lot with service type trucks. What could this look like in the future? And that's really when we talk about development goals of what can we do with inside the code to help achieve some of the visioning work that you guys have done here. On a project like this, what we see could fit maybe in the future is some apartments, maybe more middle housing income type apartments, things for live and work, park-like amenities. If you talk about mixed use, what does mixed use bring? It brings coffee shops and restaurants, maybe some of that small business retail that you talk about in your action plan. Small business retail are things like hair salons, dental, medical, clothing, sporting goods, places for dessert, right? And get a little ice cream after this meeting, maybe. Mail stop, insurance agents, real estate, some of those that might be 300 square feet even, type offices up to maybe even 1,000 square feet. But to bring that, there are certain barriers right now, and that's what we're going to be diving into when Seth steps up here. But some of those barriers within inside your code that I would love to help break down to bring some of this. First of all, it talks about scope. I look at projects as 3 different key figures, or what I call key pillars, and it's scope, schedule, and budget. So I'll talk about those 3 that are challenges as we look at a property. Scope, the current code only allows for a combination of any type of residential units and in use with retail units over those retail units. So your code actually uses the word over. And so the idea of vertical mixed use versus horizontal mixed use is really the crux of what we're going to talk about today. Right now, if we wanted to build a site that had apartments over here, all within one property ownership, and maybe some retail over here, we couldn't do that. Those apartments has to be over your retail. Okay, that's the barrier that requires for a very complex type of building, which they call a podium building. If you're not familiar with that, it uses a lot of concrete and a lot of steel that just elevates the cost of that construction. And right now, those costs are barriers to people that want to develop. They can't get the lending on that, right? Lending environment is much different now than it was a few years ago. And the cost of that construction and labor is just more expensive than if you did a traditional like 3-story or 2-story apartment next to a traditional 1 or 2-story commercial building. Scheduling, the market to attract a combined end user or a developer or end user that wants to be able, that can afford to pay for the residential units and the commercial units at the same time with that type of podium. It's really hard to attract those folks in some of these tertiary markets, right? You can find those for people that want to have that in maybe some sort of downtown area, but here it's really just, it's difficult to attract that. It's a longer lead to returns, right? So by use of horizontal mixed use, you're really bringing in a set of developers or a group of people that are looking to establish here in this town, not just someone that's looking to establish as an investor somewhere out of town or a large group or fund. And then the budget, we talked about the cost of that construction. So I've worked with a gentleman, his name's Gary North. He works one of the vice presidents of R&H Construction. R&H, you've seen maybe their names through certainly some of you that are in the industry. Some of their work in Portland, and he explains this type of podium really results in about a 38.9, so I call it 40% increase in construction costs versus the standard traditional, wood framed apartments versus wood framed retail. So with those barriers, we're thinking like, okay, how do we knock down barriers? How do we bring some of this to life? And really, it's that a commercial zone. This is the actual text where dwelling units are accessory to permitted use, and Seth's going to talk a little bit about what accessory means, and then above the permitted use. And so we want to talk about how do we give you guys offer up a proposed text amendment to break down that barrier and then bring some development forward. We're not talking about any development applications today, right? I want to be clear on that. But I do know of someone that is excited if this happens. We'll be able to quickly come back and talk about those with more detail. So with that, I'm going to have Seth come up and talk about some of the details, and I'll be right here for any questions when he's done.
So good evening, Seth Anderson, Sage Architecture. I've been an architect in the Northwest for 20+ years doing this kind of development. And as Jerry said, we want to present some options. We've done some analysis on a subject site to show you a little bit of what this might look like and some of the concerns that we heard from the Planning Commission, and we've addressed some of those so we can talk through them tonight because this is a discussion about what you want for your code. So in the working session with the Planning Commission, we found that there were really 4 main areas that came out. There was a lot of great discussion, but the desire to maintain open space for the housing portion of the mixed use, that's already in your R3 code. So the idea of maintaining that if we were to do a horizontal mixed use, the question about how much commercial accounts for a mixed use development So we've got a proposal on what that might look like. Parking, of course, these are apartments, how do we park them appropriately? And then traffic associated with this kind of use in a commercial zone. So as we went through the current code and some of the standards that exist, there were some recommendations that we look at the R3 zone as maybe a standard for the open space requirement. That requirement generally is 500 square feet of open space plus 50 square feet for each bedroom. So that nets you a place for a play area or dog runs or outdoor picnicking, those kind of things that can be used for recreation. We were asked to also look at some other cities for guidance on how other jurisdictions handle horizontal mixed use, what qualifies as commercial in a horizontal mixed use development. We heard from the fire department that they support this separating of the uses because kitchen fires account for the number one cause of fires, and the fire department doesn't want to be fighting fires that affect the business. So this helps reduce the complexity of that. And then we had a good discussion with staff about how does the current code in terms of height and open space and landscaping, all those things affect density, and what should the density be for the number of units that are allowed on a parcel. So to cover the other jurisdictions, some of the things that we found from other locations, we currently have a project in Kennewick, Washington, where we're using this exact same concept where it's horizontal mixed use. And that code basically says, as long as you have 50% of your street frontage is a commercial use, then anything else on the property can be another use, in this case, apartments. So we think that's a pretty good guide. It gives you it maintains the commercial character of that zone. As Jerry was saying, it brings those businesses. Like I said, it maintains the character of commercial with the residential set behind. Some of the other ones were Enumclaw. It just said, didn't give a percentage, just said a non-residential component has to be adjacent to a primary street frontage. So it didn't say how much, just that if you're going to provide the commercial and the residential, the commercial has to be adjacent to the street. Maple Valley, Washington said 35% of the site footprint. So that's another potential way to measure how much commercial. That's a fairly large percentage, I would say, when you can account for other desires of open space and parking. Cornelius, they actually in their code have defined specific, they call them zones, but what they're really talking about is they've mapped areas where they say along this street frontage, we want it to be 100% commercial, and then 50 foot back into the site, then it can be 50% commercial, and so forth. So that was the way that they addressed it. And then the Oregon LCD model ordinances suggest that a 20 to 60% of the frontage be a commercial use. So that's how kind of what the model code says is a potential way to measure it. So that's again with that 50%, that Kennewick sees that falls in that range. Something I thought that was interesting in the LCD model ordinances is they don't include a FARA, floor area ratio. So how much of the site can be built or needs to be built, they recommended against using that as a measurement. So what do these different models look like? We thought some imagery might help. So this is what Jerry was talking about when you talk about a vertical mixed use, these more expensive, complicated buildings where you have a commercial use on the ground floor and then residential above. So these are some different just types of that type of project. So for a specific site, we did some modeling to what does your code allow and what would that look like. So this is a vertical mixed use solution for trying to achieve about 70 apartment units. The commercial area required for this would be 18,000. That's the ground floor of the building, which then the residential is above. And you can see it is basically a building at the street and just parking. That's the rest of the site. So this, we believe this would be approvable under your code now. Yeah.
Not to interrupt, so, but under current code, is that the size of the parking area that would be required? Yes. Yeah. That's
Or
massive.
72 units.
Yeah, and just for commercial. So, something we can talk about in terms of, parking in your code, but that's, we're not here to talk about that, but we're happy, we have some data for that if you want to check that. So that's what that solution looks like to get the 70 some units of apartments. In a kind of just a rough massing, so some aerial views of what that looks like. So the lower left corner is kind of a similar angle for that photo that Jerry showed you last time. You can see it's a 4-story building adjacent to the street, which would fit within the allowable height limit. So the alternative is horizontal mixed use that we've been talking about. So the upper left-hand corner is my project that's in Kennewick there. You can see we've got open space in the middle. There's parking associated with the buildings. It's a little bit obstructed by the photo in the lower left, but there's a food cart pod that serves as part of the commercial use and the leasing building that has some community amenities. There's a photo in the upper right of a development in Bend that it uses that same kind of approach. It's commercial on the front and then apartments in the back. And then some other of the kind of typical 3-story wood framed apartments that Jerry was talking about. So here's one potential solution of what that would look like in a horizontal mixed use. So you have some commercial buildings that are set to the front. So 99 is on the left side of the image here. That's the same number of units. So same number of apartment units at 72. In order to make this work, we did have to reduce the parking. But what it did is allow for 2 buildings then in this. So that was one solution. Here's what that looks like from an aerial. So again, a 1-story building close to the highway. And then here's another concept that includes more open space. So this open space here meets the R3 standard in terms of the amount of open space that would be required based on the number of bedrooms that's currently in our code. This one also is a little bit light on parking. We have another solution where we could shift some things around and probably get pretty close to the required parking count. So this is what that looks like. Again, a 1-story building near the street and then a 3-story building behind.
I interrupt just real quick.
Yeah.
So we're talking a lot about parking, but I do really want to make sure we're focusing on this is code related zone and looking at mixed use. So when we talk about development and design at that point, that's when we're going to be looking at, is there adequate parking? Is this going to work? We can't have all these buildings. We need more parking. So I really want to make sure we're kind of focusing more on the concept of the horizontal mixed use rather than this particular design, there's not enough parking. So just.
Yeah, these are different typologies that we can talk about how the different requirements in the code would be in effect. So what our request is that in working with staff, we think that what we're really looking for is to allow another use in the commercial zone. So that use would be horizontal mixed use. Along with that use, you could set some requirements for what is needed to comply with your code. And as I mentioned, there was the discussion of outdoor play areas that's in the R3 standard. We would propose that you include that in the standard for horizontal mixed use. It's an important part of your development code, and that with the provision that open space be allowed to be used by the commercial users for patios and outdoor dining and those kind of things, still be a amenity for the site total. That we have landscaping be at the commercial use requirement of 10% of the gross land area. You're already providing open space in addition to the 10%. landscape percentage. We maintain a horizontal separation as required in the R3 standard between buildings. That's just to give some room. There's some fire code requirements that require that anyway, so that I think that's a fine standard that's in the R3 standard. And then our proposal would be use that kind of a model that 50% of the primary street frontage, measured linearly, would be some kind of retail or commercial use. That way you're allowing that, maintaining that character, and that's an easy standard for any person coming in proposing to understand. It's not overly complicated by floor area ratios and those kind of things. So that's the summary of what we would really propose for a new horizontal mixed use in the commercial zone. With that, any questions? Anything I can go back to?
So I guess one question I have then is, it would still be, because I like the conceptual designs, it helps visualization helps a lot. But it would be up to then the planning commission, city council, if we decided to go down this track to define what the percentages between commercial versus say residential would be. As you mentioned in the examples that were brought up earlier, some have 60%, some have 30%, whatever it might be.
Yeah, and that is a requirement you could add in there. We aren't suggesting that you have a ratio, because we think just saying that a portion of the frontage needs to be commercial sets that standard. That way it doesn't matter what the depth is of the lot, it's really based on what is along the street.
Well, if I look at your concept drawing here as an example along 99, the commercial is frontage to 99 like you would expect, but it allows something to be done behind without putting some other access road to go in for a hidden commercial. Visibility is pretty important for any commercial business.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that. That's exactly right. We talked about that a bit in the planning commission. I failed to mention it tonight, but yeah, it's tough for businesses if they're set back from the street to be seen. Bypass or pass by trips really help businesses on that brand awareness and show that they're there and people remember, oh, I like that place. I'll stop in there. So if you're set back off the street, it's a little harder to make it a business.
How does a change in the use, like you're talking about, how does that affect our inventory of buildable residential? Do we need to count a portion of that on a prorated basis? How are other municipalities doing that, or how is the state how do you get grace with the state on that particular ratio? That's you're potentially adding, a lot of residential units here.
Is Holly still on?
I don't know. Holly, do you want to say that?
Yes, I am here.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if Holly wants to answer that, but I can give a quick note. Is like it's already allowed right now in your code. It's more about the construction type, right? And that's the barrier we're trying to move. So you could already do, like we showed in that first example, 72 of those residential units within that commercial. So I don't know how the state qualifies or calculates that. And maybe Holly could give that a good comment back to your response.
Yeah, we've alerted Hubbard's EOA consultant that we were considering this kind of a concept, and they said it's possible just to set assumptions based upon how that property could develop or how these properties in the zone could develop. So it's not a foreign concept to them. They seem comfortable with the calculations.
Just want to think ahead a little bit about
Yeah, and you're starting to embark on that right now. So
Sure.
That's the right forethought.
Yeah, conceptually, when it comes to, our current code, and what you're proposing, so in Canby, downtown Canby, they just did this big podium style that we're talking about. And what we have in our code with the businesses on the first floor and then apartments above that. And they just did a big construction thing downtown Canby. So that's kind of what's currently in our code. You're saying that the cost of that runs about 40% higher than a more of a flat mixed use situation.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
That is what I'm saying. And working with a local general contractor, the
And then,
average that they've seen of the increase when you go to that style of construction for the square footage that you get out there is about, call it like 38.9. So I think.
and I've seen similar type of things like in Lake Oswego where they've kind of spread things out a little bit. Now they're multi-story and they're kind of almost like a, spread out, but they're still podium style buildings in their development. So I've kind of seen that as well conceptually, just kind of thinking through things here. It would, if it allows for more development for Hubbard to bring in more businesses, that sounds like something would probably be good for Hubbard. Just kind of.
Yeah, is it a fair assessment to say, like, if you mentioned you probably have a motivated client who might be interested, I'm assuming if we make this change, we will look more palatable to other clients. Is that a fair assessment?
That's certainly, that's a strong assessment, yes, and it's very accurate. And what I appreciate of your staff, and especially Holly, your consultant that the city is able to use as a planner, when we came in and talked about maybe a specific site, they made it very clear that, hey, this could be a real true benefit to Hubbard in general. And how could this be more than just a specific site conversation and something that really sparks development within some of the areas that were, frankly pointed out within the action plan.
Yeah.
So I mean, you have a really good administration and staff that's working hard for you guys to be able to do that. Cause that's when I was like, yeah, great, you're right. Where I'm talking about one motivated seller that really could spark some future development.
Yeah, and I've seen similar things happen. I think it was on the west side of Sisters where they did similar type of mixed use projects over the years, and they've really done well in that area.
They have.
So.
They've done really well in that area. And Councilor Young, when you talk about Canby, what they've done with that larger project and that podium style and some of the other ones in Lake Oswego, there was also other development tools in the toolkit that they had for those projects that Hubbard doesn't have yet, frankly, just because of its size, right? We talk about urban renewal funds and other ways to knock down the cost of those high expensive buildings, right? That they were able to use and get those done. Because if you talk about a very high expensive building, that's going to yield very high expensive rents, right? And so that's what we're trying to keep down here. So that way smaller businesses and local people for Hubbard, and you can live and work and play here in Hubbard, right? So that's the idea of trying to reduce those costs.
And anecdotally, all my projects that are the vertical mixed use are on hold right now. And everything that is 3-story horizontal mixed use are moving forward. That's just the market.
Well, it's an interesting solution, primarily because a lot of the buildable land we have that's commercial along 99 are long lots. We don't have big open tracts of land to develop. Interesting concept, for sure. James?
Is the bottom line goal the apartments? I mean, technically, that's where the money's at, but to be able to do that, you gotta throw a bone at the commercial in the front.
I would say 75-25. It's not 100% the apartments. The end user that I'm working with would love to bring some workforce housing here, as well as some other retail that might be lacking that. When you employ a bunch of people here and you want someone to be able to go grab a lunch or a coffee on their way, right? Some of that stuff. And then if someone can be living close by where they work and also grab something after work or be able to have some local services down real quick, get their haircut or something, that's also a motivation. So it's not 100%, but that's certainly what was thought. It was like, how can we bring some workforce housing here to Hubbard? And then with this idea, at first it's like, you can't afford to build that. You'll never be able to do that, right? So with this idea, it gets the housing and also some of those commercial services that we call neighborhood services sometimes too, that would really get used here through, not just on this site too, all of the surrounding properties and people that are driving by.
I mean, a design like that is good, let's see, as long as the parking is adequate for that amount.
Talk about later.
Right. But I mean, I'd find it too developed, we could have park, would be moat whether we said yes or no, we can't park. But something like that, I know Woodburn's got some newer commercial that is, they want people to live above, go downstairs and get something to eat, something to drink, grab their food, go back upstairs. similar to big cities that want people to live, work and play in their own little capsule. And that would be. Yeah, I have to venture out as far, but yeah, I think this is probably a good thing for the city.
You know, those things we talked about last month, the parking, if it's not adequate parking, it can be, it's a stop sign to it. But we add more, we know the residents around here want more businesses like this right off of 99, but it's a catch-22. Anytime we go up get on 99 in the afternoons, especially during 9 months out of the year when school's in, it's backed up for 2 hours out of the day. So you have more business and we need to have more changes made to 99.
Yeah, those are real life concerns that are happening right now, and we get that, we know that. Should this go through and we're back here having those conversations, we're gonna have to do, traffic impacts, and we're gonna look at what mitigations are gonna be good for that and parking, so. Just looking for even the opportunity to have those discussions.
We're not talking commercial, we're talking residential commercial zoning, right?
This is the C zone.
This is your commercial zone.
Because residential commercial already allows a mix of uses.
So this is strictly, I thought it was an RC zone.
Now this is.
This is strictly commercial.
Yeah.
Oh,
The conversation is to allow a mixed use within your commercial zone. And then you could take that and you guys could say, hey, we like that and we want to use that in some of the other zones too.
We're not getting anybody beating our door down to try and do commercial here. Maybe industrial, we would definitely sell that out, but I'm not seeing it in the market a whole lot of commercial. So this is a good mix.
I think this has a lot of potential to give some smaller commercial opportunity to come here. My question is, if we change the zoning, would that affect any of the buildings that are currently stacked? I know there's some in town.
And we're not requesting to change the zone. The zone changes, the zone stays the same. We're just trying to do a text amendment that allows another use within inside that zone.
So all the ones that are already here would be fine.
Yep.
It would just be, and somebody could come build one of those first ones if they chose to.
Yep.
I think they're looking to remove the word must be above.
I mean, if you strictly went down to, hey, what's the simplest thing of this? Yeah, just remove above, right? That's where the conversation frankly actually started. We just remove above, right? And then, but then obviously put in some details and everything that really needs to make sure it's very clear. And that's where we're at today. That's the crux of it.
The other benefit of what I'm seeing on this as well is it prevents the property from being a strip mall, 1970s style strip mall. So they basically want to maximize the commercial space in there. There's a big parking lot and then there's a big stuff around it. It's not very inviting, just typical 1970s strip mall.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, Mr. Mayor, as well as that's how it be developed out, but it would not be developed out like that for another decade or two.
Correct.
Because of all the rooftops that would be needed to get that strip mall. But once the rooftops were there, that's the strip mall that you would get, right?
We've had that discussion even in council before, when we talked about the annexation of property. The more residents that we do bring in, it's going to drive interest for commercial developers, et cetera, to build the amenities that some of the residents would like to see. Until that, you're right, there's just not a lot of money, there's not a lot of funding to be able to get it done.
A retail building like this is really meant for local, right? Folks that already know Hubbard, that want to be in Hubbard, and folks that want to have some services in Hubbard that might be able to get someone nudged to say, hey, why don't you put this in here? And so the size of the partitioning in this retail area will be sized adequately, so that way you could maybe just have a small mom and pop type operation, as well as maybe something that has a drive-through or something that could come through there, maybe attract that because it's in nine, who knows? But we haven't even had any of those discussions.
But it is true, if you look at, we don't have a lot of commercial property in the city right now. A couple of vacant buildings, but that's about it.
So yeah, this conversation is, first of all, when it started with planning commission, I really appreciate you all getting in. You gave us a lot of feedback and trying to come to hear the goal is, and maybe Holly can talk about that, or Sean can talk about like, what's that next step, right? So, knowing that we have a potential, end user that's ready to go for that, I don't know exactly the next steps that Holly or Sean want to take to be able to get you as a body to say, yes, let's move that text amendment forward, right? And so that way, if that can happen, the process for that would be, good, maybe Holly can state that out.
Mhm.
And then if we can get there, through any questions or any concerns, it'd be great if we can move forward.
My personal opinion, I like what I see. I do agree with the planning commission's comments, though. I mean, obviously concerned on traffic, accessibility, et cetera. 99 could be a nightmare, but that's something that will be crossed later as traffic assessment studies, as you said, would be done, et cetera. But in terms of, I mean, I have no reservations. I'd rather see us starting to build out and develop land than see it just sit there. My 2 cents.
And when it comes to traffic, you can always look at turn lanes,
There's ways to mitigate.
widening that as a cost of the development itself. Given the state standards, they can install turn lanes. We did that on the south end of town. Unfortunately, that didn't pan out. And the business would expect to go in there, but there are ways of working that into the development costs when we're looking at getting vehicles off the main thoroughfare to get them in and out of places like this.
The other big thing I want to mention too is if we're looking at any development potential along 99, that's going to go a long ways to what we heard in the visioning sessions that we held in the city. And that is, we need to do something with 99. It looks, you got it right. I mean, it looks run down. For lack, it's just, there's no investment in it, there's no sidewalks in it, it's not safe. A major development down there could be an impetus to start driving sidewalk improvements, partnering with ODOT. It could be a lot of potentials that move along with this that help us recognize a better vision along 99.
How exciting it is when you go in the mall now.
Yeah.
You've got some really nice apartments, some people are in the Weimar. Some newer all mixed in there. It actually looks inviting. Okay.
Let me clarify. So you said one of your biggest motivating factors was workforce improvement for, I'm assuming for employers. Is that accurate?
Yeah, employee housing.
Okay.
I
I wanted to make sure I heard you right.
Not only employee housing, but the goal to making sure that there is housing for employees.
And a livability that goes along with the housing.
Exactly,
Okay.
yep. At a rate that works for those employees, yeah.
I'm not trying to.
It's not the idea of doing anything, a capital A affordable type housing or anything like that, but really targeting some housing towards a workforce housing.
Okay, and that's good. I'm really clarifying. I'm not trying to pick on you.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, ask away.
I know where you're going. No, but I mean, it's a thing, even when we annexed it many years ago, the property, my driving force was apartments are not always popular. They could bring in crime, other things like that. But the potential of being able to let people who are graduating, our students that graduate North Marion go to college, they cannot come back to our city.
Right.
There's nowhere for them to live.
Yeah.
We need to have some sort of entry level type housing situations.
Mhm.
We don't have any apartments right now. We have apartment complexes, but we don't have managed apartments.
Yeah, that, not putting apartments in the middle of residential spots.
Mhm.
That is a win-win right there.
It is.
It's set alone by itself. Not interfering with the nation.
So, Administrator Wade, Holly, what is the next step for us at this point? I mean, unless, real quick, I don't want to just drive on. Is there any other questions? All right, what would be the next steps for us to make a change? Because I did read in the letter, there seems to be quite a lot.
Yeah, so I'll actually let Holly speak to the technical aspects. I have to say, from a city perspective, when I look at what I'm hearing in the community, not just from our community members as far as, housing, the lack of inventory. And it's so difficult to move into Hubbard because there are so many limited options. And some of the options that are available for like purchasing a house, the housing market's pretty high in Hubbard. So this would be a good opportunity for some other community members that want to move into Hubbard, they can stay here. From the perspective on the development side of it, allowing something like this can be very attractive for Bear Creek development is what I've heard. So that's something to consider, but for the technical side of it, I'm gonna have to defer to Holly.
Yeah, so the first step this evening would be for a city council to initiate a legislative amendment, and that would be a city council motion this evening. And that would direct staff to begin the legislative amendment process to prepare the noticing and schedule the public hearings. While your development code says that a private citizen cannot request a legislative amendment, my understanding is that we do have an application form and fee for a legislative amendment driven by a developer. So there's a discussion we need to have about whether the developer pays for this legislative amendment or if this is a legislative amendment that the city will be funding moving forward.
They're pushing the envelope. I would say let's developer foot the bill.
Can a developer word it the way they want it versus the way the city would want it?
So what the city council can do is they can initiate the legislative amendment that says we will take this through the process, but we don't guarantee the outcome, because certainly you can't possibly know what kind of public opinions and feedback you're going to receive, and also what kind of advice you're going to get from your partner agencies and staff departments and all of that. So, the city can commit to taking it through the process, but we can't guarantee the outcome.
What sort of costs are you, getting at versus organic or inorganic drive to make this happen?
So the cost would just be staff time to do the public noticing and the findings and for the public hearings themselves, and actually drafting the language itself.
Well, it's almost negligible. I mean, there's, not to keep I mean, how many hours are, I mean,
And I'm looking at 80 hours over the next 6 months.
yeah.
Oh, I don't think it'll be that much. So it's a lot of, like the public hearing stuff, a lot of template work can be done. I think from a staff perspective, it's gonna be a little more on what Holly's gonna charge us.
Oh, so no cost.
So there will be costs for Holly's staff time. I mean, ideally, I would like to work something out, where maybe they don't pay for our staff time, but reimburse us for Holly.
Okay, so that could be negotiated.
Mhm.
Is that something that needs to be mentioned in the amendment?
I would prefer it so it's on record, and then we would have to say, we start negotiating.
This be a motion or
What happened to the motion? Okay. Anyone want to take a stab from council on crafting this?
There's no script.
Yeah.
Twice.
Yeah, I took some notes. Well, I can take the shot. Okay. Let's see if I butcher this one up real bad. Okay, I would like to make a motion that we authorize the legislative amendment process to proceed to allow horizontal mixed use of commercial property. Hold on. With the opportunity, see, this is where we're putting an and in there. I don't know how that works. With the opportunity to seek shared costs. Would that work?
Yeah, I think so. Mhm.
I second.
That is the most butchered one. I'm sorry. Write that one down. Yeah, we have a motion and we do have a second. Is there any additional discussion? If not, all those in favor on council say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Okay, motion does carry.
Thank you.
Anything else we need to do this evening then? If not, I will make a motion for adjournment.
I second.
We have a motion and a second for adjournment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed, say nay. Okay, we are adjourned.
Usually there's a race condition in there.
Thank you all for your time and comments.